Poštovane koleginice i kolege, dragi dame i gospodo, dragi gosti i prijatelji Udruženja za pravo energetike Srbije, želim da vam poželim dobar dan i da vam poželim dobrodošlicu na drugi deo naše konferencije pod nazivom Pravo energetike, životna sredina i investicije u kontekstu i posle koronavirusa. Juče smo imali prvi deo ove konferencije u kom smo više govorili o potrošačima i danas nastavljamo ovu konferenciju kada ćemo govoriti više o investicijama. Ovom prilikom želim da se zahvalim svim onim koji su nam pomogli da održimo ovu našu konferenciju i istovremeno da se obratim i na engleskom. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear participants, and in the name of our Serbian Energy Law Association, I would like to welcome you to our conference named Energy Law, Environment and Investments in the Context and After COVID-19 Virus. Yesterday, we had first session when we talked about consumers and our personal necessity regarding energy law and feeling of COVID-19. And today, we will speak more about investments and energy law environment in the context and after COVID-19 virus. I would like to thank you for this conference, to our speakers, to our sponsors who helped us to organize this. Firstly, Heinrich Bosch Stiftung, BDK, law firm Moravčević, Vojnović and Partners, Rokas Law Firm, Karanović Partners Law Firm, and CMS Law Firm. And I will continue in Serbian. Mi smo zaista razmišljali da li će ove godine biti konferencije, to sam rekla i juče, i na kraju smo ipak odlučili da ova fizička distanca koja postoji ne postane i socijalna za sve nas. Zato se zahvaljujem svim članovima Udruženja za pravo energetike, zahvaljujem se svim učesnicima i govornicima ove konferencije, zahvaljujem se svima vama koji ste tu da nas slušate, što nam pomažete da održimo našu vezu koja se odnosi na jednu tako važnu temu, a to je pravo energetike. Ja bih sada dala reč našem moderatoru druge sekcije, Vuku Stankoviću, koji je direktor Rokas International kancelarije u Beogradu, da moderira ovu sekciju. Hvala vam još jednom i ostanite sa nama do kraja da pratimo ovu našu jako zanimljivu temu.
Dear Branislava, thank you very much for this announcement. Hello and welcome. My name is Vuk Stanković. I'm a head of Rokas Belgrade law firm, as well as vice president and member of the board of our association UPES. As you all know, now we are facing tremendously challenging times in terms of investment in the sector, energy sector for sure. And today panel is all about investments, climate, and the Green Deal. On our panel today, we will have Mr. Christian Egenhofer, Senior Research Fellow and the Head of Energy and Climate Programming of SERPS. He will do our key speech, Perspective of EU Green Deal after COVID-19. The second panelist will be our friend of UPES, Rosetta Karova, senior energy lawyer in the Energy Community Secretariat, she'll be talking about greening the energy community, opportunities for sector coupling. Our third presentation will be delivered by Yvonne Roja, partner and tellers the Aberu law firm from Lisbon. She will be talking about relation between energy law, climate impacts in the context and after COVID-19 virus. And our last panelist, Alexander Kovacevic, energy economist, Castle European, UK. He'll be delivering the speech about investment, COVID-19 virus, and energy law. Final speech, closing speech today will be impact of the COVID-19 virus to principles of the energy law by Rafael Hefron, Professor of Global Energy Law and Sustainability at the Center of Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law and Policy at University of Dundee. So now I will handle our virtual floor to Mr. Christian Egenhofer. Christian, are you with us?
Hello, good morning, I should say. Yeah, I'm with you. Great pleasure to be back in Belgrade, sort of. Yeah, I had hoped to be a couple of times in Belgrade, but it looks like that it will be just virtually today. But, you know, that's how it starts. I have prepared a presentation which I would like to upload. If that's it, yes, I guess, I hope you see it. Yeah, okay, so let's start. What I would like to do today, here see on my agenda, give a few words about what is the European Green Deal. I think you have been discussing it before. I hope I'm not going to bore you with repeating what has said before. Also, I guess other speakers, panelists will have to say something. But the main point will really be about 8 reasons why the European Green Deal matters for the Western Balkan, including, of course, Serbia, and then just one slide of conclusion. What is this European Green Deal? Here on the top of the slide, you see what the Commission, how the Commission describes it, resets the commitment to climate change, proof that climate change, climate neutrality can be done. And the third point is quite important. It is about the economic benefits. So it is a link of climate and the economy. It is a political strategy. I would think it's fairly robust, and I explain that in a second, because it has really had an extensive technical and political preparation. The technical preparation was based on the November 2018 long-term strategy, One Planet for All. You see here the cover page, which did a couple of 100 pages, a lot of analysis of how this could be done, developed pathways, looked at all the hard questions that need to be addressed. And I'm just, when you read it through, not all of it, but some of it, you will see none of the delicate question has been left out. Carbon capture and storage, removal, offsets, nuclear, everything is in there. So they have really dealt with everything. Now, politically, it was prepared by the Energy Union. And during the last commission, I have been several times in Belgrade and the region, and everything was about Energy Union. So you can also see the Energy Union brought together climate, energy, and competitiveness. And now we have it brought in, we have it even further broadened. What is really new in this is the social dimension. We call it just transition. You have heard about this. There is much more effort on industrial policy. How can we get these economic benefits out of this? And very important, sometimes forgotten, is a new effort and a more strategic approach to climate diplomacy. What does it mean? A strategic approach to climate diplomacy means more than just saying what the EU does and the rest should follow. No, there are bilateral discussions with all the countries and say, here is our Green Deal. We make this proposal to you, and now let's discuss. And there is one of those quite well advanced there is a proposal for a Green Deal with South Africa, for example, coal country, as you all know. And how can we use the EU's fund to do something which is in line with this European Green Deal? And that is, I think, important to keep in mind, these Green Deals on the EU climate diplomacy part. I'll just skip through those. I just wanted to show this is not a thing the Commission does in 5 years. The Green Deal is not going to be completed with von der Leyen. It's the beginning of an economic transformation, and it will shake up all policies. And you see agriculture, biodiversity, urban, etc., etc. Here is from the long-term strategy, all the scenarios. If you want to read them through, you can pick the ones you like. You know, here you have heating, etc., etc., if you wish. Now, why does it matter? The second part. First, I just repeat myself. Actually, it is well prepared. It is a next logical step for the EU to link the climate, energy, and the industrial. And I think that's the important part. As I said, it is from Energy Union to the European Green Deal, and it was prepared with the long-term strategy. So it's not going to get away. It's going to be there for a long time. It's not like the Energy Union is finished now. It's not really finished, but it's the Green Deal will be there in 10 years' time, etc., etc. It may be called differently. The communications paper may give it a different name, but the essence will be there. And very important, we always forget in these European internal discussions, actually, the EU, and I talk European internal discussions, not EU internal discussions. The EU is not alone. There's a lot of member states who have come up with climate neutrality. UK, France, Finland has a climate neutrality target by, hold your breath, 2035. Sweden, 2045, and you could go on like this. Japan, shortly after 2050. Canada, China, and every year there are new ones adding. Now, the Chinese commitment, if it's done, we cannot judge that. The Chinese commitment of 2060 climate neutrality is certainly more ambitious than the European Union's approach. Just keep that in mind. Finland 2035, why on earth would they do that? Keep it that in mind. Now, here is a third reason, because we have now long-term targets, climate neutrality 2050, 2035, 2060, 2070, you choose it. That of course means you have to do something about it, and you cannot just say, hey, we do the targets and then 10 years later, oh, sorry, we missed them, so was not good. No, more and more laws are done to push climate neutrality in practice. And I think I just mentioned a couple of very, very important ones, the sustainable finance taxonomy. And then you have carbon pricing, implicit, explicit. There are product standards. Certain products will not be able to be used, imported, and technical standards. That's the equivalent in the WTO trade part. Then you see the competitiveness, high carbon GDP becomes a liability. And when you look at the figures, it is Russia and China which have a lot of carbon in their units of GDP. That means they have high liability. I would read the Chinese approach to get rid of this. I didn't find the figures for Serbia, but I looked up the figures for Bulgaria, which may have a similar structure. And actually, Bulgaria has the highest GDP, the highest carbon per GDP in the EU. So I would expect something similar. So there is liability in Serbia, I would expect, unless someone really contradicts me. In Ukraine is exactly the same if we talk energy community. There will be trade measures, carbon border adjustment mechanisms. You have seen that. Some will have to pay for their carbon embedded in their products. And the key, at least in initial phases, of course, solar, PV, I mean, energy, renewable energy, wind, biomass, etc., to bring the carbon down, to bring it down from the coal and lignite. So many measures are done. And in parallel, and that's you should not underestimate, there are more and more methodologies developed to monitor and account for carbon and energy, in carbon in energy and products, in embedded. Once they are there, they will be used in one way or the other, be it in trade, carbon border measures I mentioned, be it in competition between different countries, you see between different sectors. You see already some retailers say, hey, we are low carbon, we are low carbon. Google, Apple want to be low carbon by 2050, by 2030, etc., etc. So it will be a competitive advantage. Investors will look at the carbon. The banks, the institutional investors say, do I want to hold lignite assets? Probably not. And central banks are looking into this, as you see it across the world. Now, then there is the investors. The fifth reason, we have financial markets and private investors look look more and more into this. And I think the private investors less and less will finance assets. And even we had some discussions in South Africa is, basically everything is on coal, the power sector. The politicians and the executive get worried that they might actually have to pay a premium even for World Bank loans, etc., if you invest in carbon. So in the short term, certainly there is a possibility you will get money and support for this technology, but in the long term, it might well turn out as a liability. And insurance companies will less and less underwrite high carbon projects, not to be underestimated. This is important. All these projects need to be underwritten and insured, underwritten. And then also the insurance company also, of course, are asset managers. They also look very much at these risks. So more and more of this will be coming. The same in the EU. EU support, should you care about it, will depend more and more on alignment on the European Green Deal objectives. And there is no or very little political discretions. Have no illusion. In the EIB lending policy, there is a hard benchmark on how much carbon per kilowatt hour or per megawatt hour you can emit. And in the EU funds, similar. So there is not a discretion and say, yeah, Serbia is very much different than the rest of the world. We have to have an exemption. Yes, you may get a little bit of a transition, but that's it. So that's another point. Now, the climate diplomacy I have mentioned, it will focus on Green Deal objectives. There will be green deals with partners, small green deals, big green deals, and you will see more and more of this coming also from other governments being engaged in the Paris Agreement. The US is back to the Paris Agreement. They may not necessarily make very, very strong climate policy, but they will be at the table and they will be held responsible to be in line with the Green Deal objectives, etc., and others will do the same. Also, if the Chinese are sort of throwing around money for coal, they will be asked, what the hell are you doing? You have signed up to the Paris Agreement, you want to be carbon neutral. It cannot be that you start subsidizing, supporting coal and lignite project around the world. And we all know the COVID-19 recovery is green. There is a minimum 37% of green objectives in the National Recovery and Resilience Plans. And all the rest of the 63 will have to be no harm principle. And no harm principle, if you want to translate it, no coal, no gas, and all kind of no support for internal combustion engine support. Of course, it will be still done, but no support for this under that. So this and the EU budget also has a target of 30% being for green or for climate related. So these are the 8 reasons. I think they are compelling why it makes a case for looking into this. And I'm not saying now the world from tomorrow onwards will be all green, but there is long-term trends, and I think they have been firmly set up. They have been firmly set up on motion. These trends are there. They're not just the EU, they're everywhere. They are across the world, and you will see more of this. You can also see the EU is a little bit structuring, trying it out, trying to be the first to push the others, but the others will move in a similar direction in different speed, etc. So let me finish with my last one. At the moment, this is the conclusion. There's a lot of carrots. There is a lot of carrots at the moment, but sort of if we start thinking about 2025, the stick gets a little bit bigger. And if you talk about 2030, the stick, you know, is really sizable and the carrot gets very small. And I guess my main point here is, you know, just bite in the carrot as long as it's there. You may need a little bit of strength to cope with the stick afterwards. And now with this, I would just leave and hand over to the moderator. Vuk, over to you. Thank you for having listened to this.
Thank you very much for this this presentation. Thank you very much indeed. I have some questions for you, but prior to that, after we are done with all our presentations, I will try to open for the questions through our web chat. So, dear audience, please free to ask our panelists whatever you like. And after that, Alexandra Petrovic, attorney at law from Moravcevic, Vojnovic and Partners law firm, will give us a lesson learned, and this will be our final stage of the conference. Now, Christian, thank you once again. So we were saying that EU is not alone in this, as we saw from your presentation. So you mentioned that some other countries like Canada or Japan is passing through regulatory changes in terms of climate law as well. So how those targets complies with the Green Deal?
We could have another, you know, 1 week seminar if you start comparing what the different countries do. I wasted 2 years of my life on this, and you don't get to any conclusion. No, but you get an order of magnitude. A fast growing economy like China being carbon neutral just 10 years after the EU is of course very, very ambitious. Whether it's more ambitious or not, whether they end up in 65 or in 59, I don't think really matters. Now, the point is really the moment you take a long-term commitment, people will start asking you, what are you going to do to make it happen? And this is where the European Union has the energy and climate plans, and you will see similar plans appearing there everywhere. And also the energy community at some stage will start asking, what are you doing about this? And these plans are very important. Initially, you know how it works. The ministers say, oh yeah, we need a little bit more low carbon. Let's put in a bit of biomass. Let's put a nuclear power plant there. Let's put a gas, a couple, five CCGTs in there. And we have done our emission. Yes, we have a low population growth. But you know, when you come to 2030, you realize it hasn't happened. Those 5 CCGTs are not there. The nuclear plant is not there, and your biomass is also not there. Then you build held responsible. And what you see in some of the member states is the NGOs go into this research community, go into there is money for think tanks to study this, and they say, hey, minister, sir or madam, I don't think this is a plan which is credible. And the Commission says, yeah, you know, I don't think it really works. Think about your carbon liability. So it's not like Brussels comes with the stick or Brussels come with the finger. They just say, think about it, because you're on, you know, you may be on a track which gets you off the mainstream and where you're not a very attractive partner for investment, etc., etc. You know, you create transparency, you create debate. And that is important. And then people start asking, what can we realistically do? And if after 10 years' time, your investment still hasn't happened, then people will also start, that's the topic of today, why is that investment not happening?
Okay, Christian, thank you for this succinct comment. So hopefully we'll have Sorry.
I'm not sure whether it was succinct, but it was a comment.
Yeah, you mentioned that you wasted 2 years of your life for handling this issue. So this was really succinct, and thank you for that. Hopefully, we will have a room for this in our another conference or maybe webinar that we are planning to do maybe in January or February this year. So we will be honored to welcome you on this on that panel. So my next question.
Happy to come to Belgrade again in January.
Oh yeah, we are all hoping to that. We are all hoping to that.
Thank you.
So as we all know, the Western Balkans relies mostly on carbon. So what the Green Deal will bring to private sector in terms of investments, maybe renewable energy sources. What is your prediction and maybe your experience in that regard?
You mean me still, Vuk?
Yeah.
You know, there is a lot of at the moment you have carbon. I would say high carbon investment is only possible in sort of state guaranteed, state driven system. Now, if you look about renewables, etc., that is more on the private, you know, distributed generation, this kind of stuff, and there will be quite a bit of scrutiny there. And you will need private money, and private money means it has to find, first of all, you have to make money out of it, revenue. The infrastructure will have to be there, and that is sometimes a problem in many of the countries here. And the regulatory framework will have to be there. Otherwise, the cheap renewable technologies really don't work. And then if this doesn't happen, then you go back to the old traditional while and be discussing lignite or CCGTs or nuclear. I mentioned that, but again, that will not happen either, because by that time we will be so much advanced that the money and the taxonomy and all these regulatory frameworks will have changed in such a way that it gets more and more difficult, except a country really wants to put in a lot of money in its energy sector. Countries which don't have the money available or may need it for other things than sinking it into the energy sector, which perfectly well can be financed by private investment.
Okay, thank you, Christian, for this. And in that regard, what is your final recommendation for Western Balkans in implementation of the Green Deal and for sure Sofia Declaration? Well,
yeah, you know, we have done quite a bit of work on Southeast Europe. It's on our website, if you allow me a short advertising here. And you know, what we found is that the regulatory structure in countries, and I can speak here now for the EU member states, Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece, the regulatory framework is probably not in place to trigger that investment. There is enormous changes now in Greece. I think Greece may be now become sort of the shining star on this. Is a I think an incredible fast phase out policy of coal. It's almost frightening. It may perhaps be delayed, but if you really want to have new investment, you have to get some of the old assets out. Otherwise, they'll be very, very cheap. So the regulatory framework is still the biggest issue, and we can have all kinds of green deals unless there is the framework that allows for the investment. It won't happen. And if you just go back, we know it all very well. Where does the energy community come from? It comes from the fact we need a lot of investment. The EU will not be able to deliver that investment, or the Americans or China or whoever you think about, or Russia. So we need private investment. And for that, we create a market. We're linking the energy community countries to the market. And therefore, we have transparency, and they have a market that actually is conducive to private investment. This is still an issue also in Southeast Europe, in the member states, no question. about this, it's being addressed. Now, it's not up to me to make a judgment how much in the energy community this has advanced, and there are more competent people than me to discuss about this.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I'm working for a Greek law firm, and I know the situation down there, and I'm happy for commending Greece as a shiny example, and I hope that we are all going to follow that example in a forthcoming period. Thank you once again for your presentation. As I mentioned, we are waiting you most probably in January, February for some kind of webinar. It was a real pleasure having you.
It was a great pleasure having been invited. Thank you. And I look forward to the next invitation. Thank you, Vuk and the others. I'm listening now to the energy community.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will hand our floor over to Rosetta. Rosetta, are you with us?
Yes, I'm
here. Yes, you're going to tell us something about greening the energy community, about opportunities for the sector coupling, right?
I think that was also the invitation from Christian at the end of his presentation and the answering to your question. Somehow he refrained from speaking about the energy community, so I will do that with pleasure. But
you're most welcome.
Before that, I would, of course, like to thank the organizers, to thank Branislava for this invitation. It became a tradition to speak at your annual event, and I do that with pleasure. Of course, it would be much more pleasure to be there with you in Belgrade, but I hope that next year we will all have a chance to do so. And in between, like this virtually, I would like to take over from maybe where Christian stopped, and actually I will, of course, inevitably repeat few words on the European Green Deal, but I will not focus on it. I will take out some of the elements. And actually, I have chosen to speak about sector integration, the role of hydrogen, and few other elements, because the energy community as such is a sectoral organization, no? So all its legislation and the Energy Community Treaty, it was sector only, so energy only legislative framework initially when it was established, most of it now. Now it's much larger, so we have a legal framework and binding rules for renewables, energy efficiency, and so on, not yet on climate. But as we heard, the European Green Deal is changing the European Union. It's requiring changes and reform of the energy sectors of the European countries, and that inevitably draws on requests for changing the legal and regulatory framework, also in the European Union. And therefore, because the energy community actually stands for importing the European rules to these countries, to these third countries, which are 9 countries, the Western Balkans plus other 3. So therefore, it will also require changes in the legal and regulatory framework in these countries. Now I will try to share my presentation. And so actually, the European Green Deal sets the objective of climate neutrality. But if we know that we are starting from an energy sector which is responsible for 75% of the European greenhouse gas emissions, this requires, and reaching the 2050 climate neutrality objective requires actually a lot of electrification of the economy, of all the sectors of the economy, deep decarbonization, and not all sorts of electricity, but actually electricity coming from renewables. This brings inevitably changes to the energy sectors as we know them now. So now traditionally, and this is a picture from the European strategy on sector integration, traditionally we have had one energy source linked with one end user sector. Traditionally, oil has been fueling the transport sector, heating has been fueled by gas, electricity has been produced from coal and gas, and so on and so forth. This will not be the energy sector of the future. So there will be, or the idea is not to have these linear and wasteful flows of one energy to one end user sector, but the idea is to link the different energy fuels through different energy carriers with many end user sectors. And actually this requires also changes of the energy sector as such. It requires integrating it, coupling it with other sectors. And here, even though sector coupling and sector integration is used interchangeably and sometimes as synonyms, there is a bit of difference. So the sector coupling requires linking the electric, whereas the sector integration actually requires using of final energy in different end-use sectors, so transport, heating, and so on. And the definition that they put here comes from the sector integration strategy, which talks about coordinated planning and operation, not only of the energy system, but across multiple energy carriers, decarbonized gases, hydrogen, and so on, infrastructure and consumption sectors, transport, chemicals, railway, aviation, and so on. So why is this necessary? This is necessary because it will minimize the cost of transition. We said that it's necessary and it's expected to electrify the economy. But in 2050, that may happen 65%. But what about the rest of the economy? Direct electrification will not always be a reply. So it will have to be chosen between which sectors need a direct electrification, meaning using electricity for the purposes previously fueled by other energy carriers, and where we will need indirect electrification, actually converting electricity to other forms of energy, for instance, hydrogen, and then using it whenever needed, storing it, using it for heating, for producing electricity when we need it, and so on. And the Commission sees in its strategy 3 main synergies from this sector integration. One is linking it with energy efficiency first and having more circular energy systems, so less waste and producing energy from waste heat, let's say. Then greater direct electrification, but again, not for 100%, and topping up the rest with renewables and low carbon fuels. So this actually electrification and a decision of where do we use direct electrification and when do we have to search for other alternatives, it will depend on the costs, on the development of the technology, but also on the support, on the legal and regulatory framework. And actually, if you think, I read somewhere an example, if you use power to create hydrogen, and then you use the hydrogen to create power, to generate power whenever needed in future, then there is a certain conversion rate, which means that around 60% of the originally produced electricity is lost in the transformation process. So this then poses the questions when we can do this, when it's cost effective, when it's necessary. And here it comes the role of the hydrogen and the decision, when will we actually rely on it? If you see here, the question is then, but why exactly hydrogen? And the Commission, together with the sector integration strategy, published also a hydrogen strategy. And there it has said that clearly the clean hydrogen is a priority, but they will allow using also different hydrogens in between, low carbon hydrogens. And the hydrogen is seen as a missing link in the puzzle to a decarbonized economy. But it's true that the hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, but it can only be found in small concentration on Earth because it's very much reacting with oxygen for creating water. So the difference with other fuels is that it's not only a fuel, but it can also be an energy carrier. So as we said, instead of when increasing the renewables, instead of curtailing, they can be transformed into hydrogen, stored, and then used again as a power or for heating or fueling the transport sector. However, the hydrogen is still very expensive and it's not cost competitive with other, the clean hydrogen, it is very expensive. And clean hydrogen here is meant when the hydrogen is produced from renewable electricity. So not the other types of hydrogen, which inevitably will be used and will be necessary in the transitional period up to 2050. Sorry, I have moved. And the idea is just to say that the hydrogen now in the energy mix appears for 2%, and this will have to be extended to 13–14% by 2050, which is again not a lot. And from here, we just need to know that the aim is to promote the clean hydrogen, but in between, we will need to use other sorts of hydrogen and other alternative fuels. And again, because of cost, because of technology, not all the sectors will benefit from having hydrogen. For the cars, for fueling the car sector, so for instance, for heating, for producing electricity, there will always be a better and cheaper alternative. But then this is an energy law conference, and I myself am a lawyer. So for me, this is actually the most interesting part of the full story. I'm not an engineer. I try to understand a lot. Why do we need these things? Why do we need energy sector integration? Why do we need hydrogen and so on? But what that means actually for the European Union legal rules, but also what will it mean for the energy community legislative framework? The clean energy package has been adopted, and for instance, consumer information and empowering, we heard yesterday a lot about prosumers, has been initiated. But all this will have to continue with upgrade of the gas legal framework. The current gas legal framework has been created for liberalizing a gas sector and for enabling a competitive gas market, something that already existed in the EU member states. Now, if we say that regulation is necessary for market failure, for addressing market failure, now we have a question, but we don't have a market for decarbonized gases yet, not only hydrogen, but also the other decarbonized gases. So now is the question, we don't have the market, we don't have the infrastructure fully in place, we don't have the demand. The hydrogen strategy talks about speeding up the demand and creating it. So basically, and we have to have the rules. How do you enable investment in low carbon hydrogen, for instance, so not the clean one, if you know that in 2050 you will not be able to use it anymore? This may become stranded costs at the end of the day. Then the question is, are there going to be regulation, and of which parts of the chain? Is vertical integration going to be allowed, and long-term contracts? For instance, we know that gas market and gas sector long-term contracts have been existing throughout the transition and before, and even today, of course, compliant with competition rules. Then a clear definition of decarbonized gases. What is going to be supported? How it's going to be supported? The question of taxation, avoiding double taxation. What kind of subsidies for electrolyzers? What kind of subsidies for decarbonized gases are going to be there? The state aid framework, for instance, is now under review, and in 2021 we are going to see more of it, and we are going to see the changes. However, this is necessary also to bring the legal certainty for investors and for the countries also where they will need to invest more. What is the role of the incumbent companies? What is the role of the system operators? Are the transmission system operators going to be allowed to deal with competitive hydrogen parts of the sector? Are they going to be able to operate electrolyzers? Is there going to be a third-party access, and when? From the very beginning or only at the end in 2050? Is there going to be an unbundling requirement? But when? Again, tomorrow, in 2025, or in 2030? Are we going to go to ownership unbundling requirement for them? Yes or no? What are the financial consequences? We have issues with the quality, for instance. Now the current legal framework is setting the quality for natural gas. However, what about the decarbonized gases? Then the quality, the interoperability of the systems, when there will be cross-sector trade of decarbonized gases, that all will bring changes to the legislative and regulatory framework, and also will have impact on the cost for the end consumers. The end user appliances will need to comply with different standards and different rules, guarantees of origins, planning of the infrastructure. Now the planning of electricity and gas sectors and infrastructure is done separately, but not only that they will need to be combined and planned jointly, but there has to be a coordinated planning with the transport infrastructure. If we would like to one day in 2050 take really the electrified railway or the train from Vienna and arrive to Athens, we would need to have a compatible infrastructure, not only on the electricity side, but also on the transport side. There are a lot of other legal questions that are running in my mind as a lawyer when I read about energy sector integration and hydrogen and so on. And we can discuss some of these maybe later. I don't have the answers because they are not yet within the European Union. They are under development. We are seeing new rules being published all the time. Even the renewables and energy efficiency directives that have just been adopted 2 years ago are now undergoing revision. But these are all questions that not only then in the European Union will have to be addressed, but these will all questions and legal and regulatory framework that is going to be part of the energy community, therefore also binding for the region and for Serbia. And then now we come to something that you started discussing with Christian before. What about the Western Balkans as countries that are members of the energy community? The European Union has seen that it's possible to put substantial amount of money and to offer in the economic and investment plan of the Western Balkans some up to 9 billion euro of grants, giving a possibility to raise them up to 20 billion euro in guarantees for investments in energy, transport, and digital transition. And here the European Union has said, okay, if all this money are used for cleaning the energy sectors, sustainable transport, digital future, and so on, then the Western Balkans is going to be the most attractive region for investments in the world. I still would like to see that happening, but that's something that the countries have committed to. So that's okay, fine. If you, European Union, are giving all this money, then we are going to express our political commitment, and they signed the Sofia Declaration on the green agenda. This is, of course, in the long-term vision for establishing a climate-neutral, resilient, efficient, and competitive economy. The countries certainly are going to benefit from this. The idea is that the gap between the European Union member states and the Western Balkans is not deepening anymore, and they have taken certain commitments to align with the new climate law. We can maybe discuss this later, but what the climate law means for the European Union, setting targets, it's not the same for the Western Balkan countries. For instance, here, we don't have still, they're not part of the EU ETS, there is no carbon pricing except in Montenegro. Yes, yesterday it was mentioned that North Macedonia is working on the national energy and climate plans, and we have reviewed it within the Secretariat, but this is based on a recommendation. The Commission still has to propose the governance regulation to become part of the energy community acquis. So there is a lot of work to be done, and actually the Commission has put this as a clear precondition that all this economic investment is subject to accelerated reforms, but also to establishing a common Western Balkans regional market. We have the energy community as a sectoral organization, and regional market is required in energy, but it's interesting to read that this roadmap for a regional market in all the areas, recognition of licenses, tourism, joint offers, and so on, all this is precondition for being closer to the European internal energy market. We could do another seminar on this, but now just to conclude, we need to turn the page. Be it in the Western Balkans, be it in Ukraine, the full energy community has to turn the page. We are starting from a status quo where indeed the liberalization or the first transition is not finalized fully yet. But the European Union is working on the cross-border adjustment mechanism to prevent risk of carbon leakage from the energy community as third countries as well. So they need to establish carbon prices, they need to improve the state aid enforcement, and they first of all need to stop subsidizing coal-fired power plants. We know that we have to expect that coal, oil, and natural gas at a certain point in time will have to be phased out, and there has to be other alternatives. And that's why I have chosen to speak about two of them. So obviously not covering the full European Green Deal, but hydrogen use to a certain extent when possible, when necessary, and so on. There is also an international dimension of the EU hydrogen strategy, which concretely mentions the cooperation with the energy community and especially Ukraine. We have also just initiated a study on hydrogen for the energy community, and I'm participating as a member of the team for this, working on this study with the consultants. And we have also just published a renewables in transport study. So these are all possibilities to see how we can use decarbonized fuels and how we can decarbonize the economy. Of course, the sector integration. There is a transport community now established with a seat in Belgrade as well. So we are ready to work together on taking this electrified train from Vienna to Athens. And we can actually, it's all a matter of perception. Whether the glass is half full or half empty, it depends on the perception. We can say that this crisis, also the pandemic and all this crisis in which the energy sector is, provides an opportunity to engage on improving this and transitioning to a clean energy system. Of course, the regional cooperation is outlined in all the strategies of the European Union for within the EU, but also within the energy community is a precondition. And the energy community provides a platform for such regional cooperation to facilitate this economic recovery. I hope I was in time, but I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Rosetta. So I have one question for you. So you're a lawyer working for the energy community. So what green agenda truly represents legal or political commitment?
For the moment, as I said, the Western Balkans countries, for instance, have signed the Sofia Declaration, and the communication from the European Union only covers the Western Balkans countries. The energy community is broader than that. It's not only about the Western Balkans countries. It's also about Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. At the moment, we have several recommendations. We have political commitments expressed also by our ministers of the energy community. And there have been also policy guidelines adopted, and there will be a new document adopted at the upcoming Ministerial Council next week, sorry. But we have no legally binding framework yet. So we don't have the clean energy package yet with us. We still don't have the 2030 targets set for the energy community or nationally binding targets for the countries. So we are still working on that. 2021 will be the year when hopefully we are going to get this legislation as binding for the energy community contracting parties. But of course, by expressing all these political commitments, the countries are committing to work on it. And they will have to take steps, indeed, as Christian was saying, phasing out coal, replacing it with renewables, checking other alternatives, but also taking important but also difficult steps in terms of course, it was mentioned just transition, but we do not have a just transition for the energy community yet. So of course, we also do studies. We will also have a project on this. The Commission has mentioned in its communication that the European Just Transition Mechanism can serve as a model for the Western Balkans, but we still do not have that. It's a work in progress.
Okay, thank you, Rosetta. As questions are coming to the chat for you, I can see that, but we will leave it for later. Now we have to move. Thank you for your clarification, and I'm looking forward to further discussion with you when the panel is closed. So please, Yvonne Roja, floor is yours. Hello, regards from Belgrade.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in Belgrade, even in a virtual way. Thank you, Bratislava, for the invitation, and thank you very much to UPES for the organization of this event. I really think that EFELA and all the national energy law associations that make part of it, and Serbia is one of them, are a good example of what should be done in the legal framework that Rosetta finished to talk about, and there's a lot of work to do on this. We should promote the discussion and the studies that must be carried out on this task to achieve the energy transition that will only succeed if it is done for all. This kind of events are a good opportunity to get conclusions and to construct the energy law as an independent law practice, taking care of its production, transport, trade, mixed consumption in an automatic way. My presentation are more topics of reflection than conclusions. I'm afraid of that. I've prepared a PowerPoint that I would like you to put in the ecran. Move to the first one. My presentation, as I said, are more topics of reflection, taking in consideration the pandemic moment we are going through and the need, or perhaps the only opportunity, to take advantage of this moment to incorporate definitely and fully the energy transition. So about the question, the relation between energy law and climate impacts in the context and after COVID virus, I suggest an answer: a permanent marriage. Take in consideration, and please, a new slide. Thank you. The failure of our model of the development, the COVID concept's impacts, the opportunity of change that we are living, the conditions for an energy protocol, the role and the necessity of creation of global energy principles with common rules, the legal and regulatory framework, because we need to be all in the same speed. Another slide, please. About the failure of the model, much has been written and much has been said, but I think that we have an important moment. We have not yet experienced an event that has quickly demonstrated that effectively we will die if we insist in the way of we live. And from an economic point of view, this pandemic, according to the official reports of IMF, will shock the public debt to levels higher than 1944 in the post-World War II. So it's an unprecedented economic downturn. And from a social point of view, this pandemic provides inequalities resulting from a sharp increase in unemployment. And also from an environment point of view, this pandemic, if on one hand brought us the reduction of emissions, which is good, on the other hand, reveal us how unsustainable habits can put the world in danger. So these three impacts, from an energy point of view, the combination of these effects brought a decrease in energy consumption in the industry during the period of confinement, an increase in domestic energy consumption, which in several countries, such Portugal, has brought a decrease in fossil energy consumption and an increase of renewable energy consumption. But it also shows us the importance of the fight energy poverty by the energy impact on health, living conditions, telework performance, and so on. So all of this is transforming and has got impact on our way of thinking and our way of living. The next slide, please. But we have always the carrot and the stick, as said Christian today. So we have positive, and if we, in a positive way, we think about the construction of a new normal with fewer travelers. That's why we are not in Belgrade today. More proximity between the productions and the consumption, and telework and so on. But we also have, if we think in a positive way, we find, I think, the necessary consensus around the need to stop climate change. COVID brings us, and for me it's the most important thing, a global way of feelings, our naked interdependence of feelings, because distance gave way to a close and filled interdependence. The vision that we have of climate change by assisting in our comfort of our homes gave way to simultaneous suffering. The speed of contamination of this virus was brutal and has put us all with the same circumstances where no one is watching, but everyone must cooperate. And so it brings that to the scientific data on climate change, the economic data of its effects, the social problem it entails. We are assistant to the ethical field experience of global damage problem. And this is very important because we should think about consumption and we should think about production. But we also have the stick, the negative effects. The first one, of course, in our health. But the second one, also very important, on the economic with the indebted public and private, which from a production point of view can lead a temptation to negligent environment sustainability for the benefit of rapid overcoming of the lack of solvents. And that's why it's very important to be, we need a stick, a legal stick to maintain the strategy. Next slide, please. So we must take advantage of the positive effects, look at post-reconstruction invites as an opportunity for decarbonization, for climate combat, and for the construction of the new model. We should rethink economic growth. Economic recovery demands investment, and the transition to low carbon society also requires investments. We should put the two things together and create a package with multiple benefits. The Green Deal, as Vicente remembered yesterday, taking as an example the Roosevelt Recovery Plan. It's very important, this European document. Another slide, please. Thank you. If you look for energy, and it is impossible to live without it, we quickly conclude that energy production remains the primary driver of GHG emissions. So we must regulate, taking into consideration the new technology, the energy efficiency, and the demand management in the side of consumption and the clean energy production, including renewable and in a complementary way, the green hydrogen, applicable in all countries, in all sectors, without forget the energy poverty. Another slide, please. We have should consider all the impacts that energy has got on the production, on the consumption, on the way of we live, on the poverty, on health, and so on. And we should rethink all this connection. And if we rethink, we should demand that we should make an agreement or a protocol between all the parties. And I will ask you, please, for the new slide, please. Thank you. As I'm trying to explain, energy demands a protocol between governments or European Union, the business stakeholders, and all the civil society. and we should promote a legal, political, and economic converge wherever possible, and do so in an active way. We should find the new sector at DNA, as Dirk Burschel also talked about it yesterday in this webinar. And here is very important to find principles, but a new regulatory and legal framework in order to make it possible. The rules of the protocol, the rules of this great big agreement should be done by an important instrument, which is the new energy law. A new slide, please. Thank you. So, because we need stable and inclusive, as we should be all on board, of course, we have the basis of the Paris Agreement objectives. The European Union had created principles and the Green Deal, but we should put all the states in the same speed, and to get the structure of the energy law, we can call it green energy code if you want it. This is very important because taking as an example the carrot and the stick given by Christian, that I appreciate very much this slide, we should remind that it's not a question of energy production. We have to have a clear original certificate market, a clear tax carbon rules, clear relationship between the state support and financial of the energy production and state aids. We have to design a new market energy and so on. So this is very important, and we should be certain that we should be all on board. So in a conclusion, I should say that as Achim Steiner said, that the new green economic world provides a new engine of growth, putting the world on the road to the prosperity again. This is about growing the world economic in a more intelligent, sustainable way. And take this in consideration, we should say that energy is the driver, energy law an important instrument, and EFELA and all the independent organizations should have got the obligation of being an important promoter of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Indeed, more about energy law principles we'll hear from Dr. Hofron at his closing speech. And I really appreciate your presentation and slide, and we all appreciate your dedication to EFELA as the rooftop association of energy law. So we were saying that it is very important that rooftop associations such as EFELA and our local association work closely together with all market stakeholders. So from your point of view, should they cooperate more with the private or with the government public sector? Where is the key of cooperation? What is your thoughts?
As you have noticed on my slides, I put them all in the same position, because it's very important, and this is the key of the solution. Have an agreement, the balance between the public entities, the states, and the private sector, the business stakeholders. Because if we create a law with that it is not acceptable in practice, and we lawyers, we usually help our clients in order to get to prepare in order to do the compliance law, but also to create opportunities of the new rules. And this is very important of the rule of FL and its association to show, because we are very independent. We are lawyers, we are academics, we are magistrates, we are regulators, all are members with the necessary distance of the market and of the political power, if you want. So we should show the importance of stability and the importance of the creations of a new legal and regulatory framework to the public, but we should also get we should also listen to private stakeholders in order to create and in order to help this protocol, this agreement, and this dialogue that should be done. Without it, I think it will not be, we will have always a big stick and not a big carrot.
Okay, thank you very much for this clarification. So we should attack them all, and the both private and government sector should learn from our association and from us, and we should draft the regulatory framework together in order to be the best one for implementation. And because we are challenging very hard times, very challenging times due to COVID crisis and due to the reforms that we are looking forward to. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much. Now I will the next panelist. I will ask Alexander Kovacevic to take the floor. Alexander, are you here?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I choose to speak in front of this background, which is a photo from 2004 made by a young photographer at that time, Mr. Anjic. And that was in our book, Stuck in the Past, which was one of the pillars of the Energy Community Treaty signed in 2005. So this photo is over there, and it reminds still today what is this all about. Actually, Belgrade's real estate market has developed an interesting appetite for high-rise buildings, and obviously people who eventually buy apartments sufficiently high are going to see this landscape. It turns out that everybody today been talking about investments from a different, and here is a bit of thoughts about investments in the energy community. This was due to come into public domain for a number of years now, and I guess it's quite important that we consider that in a realistic context. What we've been talking today is actually about challenges to the status quo, to existing incumbent energy suppliers, and to the way how these companies are producing energy. So the European Green Deal, the climate change process, emissions, various barriers to entry, exposure to respiratory infections such as coronavirus. All of these tend to be challenge to the status quo. This is very well described in a recent publication from the Energy Community Secretariat, so Energy Transition Tracker, which for the first time actually demonstrates the reality, the physical reality on ground, gives us wealth of data so we can see where the region stands in the context of obligations, climate change, EU aspirations and for a clean air, and etc. So this is where it stands right now. Do we need investments? Do we need commercial investments? Do we need investments intended to serve the customers? Sustainable investments? It's difficult to say. I think that all these question marks are quite useful here. So if we think that we need to change the status quo, we just need to understand what that really means. This is about 2/3 of available power generation capacity to be somehow changed. Entire district heating infrastructure, sources of heat, more than half of residential space heating systems. If we are looking to protect people from respiratory infections in the future, if we want to clean the air, this is where we come. That's what we need to do. Entire portfolio of domestic hot water production. 98% of hot water is produced by simply heating water by electricity directly. That is not sustainable. This is a quarter of power generation in this region, and so on. So we need the change. We need to see how the region is going to change all this. Report from the European Commission to European Parliament about the Energy Community Treaty from 2011 actually talks about this. It talks about implementation of the Energy Community Treaty, and it talks about investment challenge. Hoping that that a lot of things are going to happen by December 2017. We are now in December 2020. So just remember. A little timeline here. Starting from 2004, when the region of Southeastern Europe synchronized back to European interconnection after, at that moment, 12 years of asynchronous operation away from European system. And then we see all kinds of things which actually happen during this period. I will only talk about bright side of this. In 2008, European International Energy Agency provided energy policy review to Western Balkan countries, laying the ground for commercial investments. In 2010, the World Bank provided stock-taking report on energy efficiency in Western Balkans, providing further ground, providing ideas, investment solutions, etc. Providing a bit of knowledge for the same purpose. There was a call for action in 2014 with the massive floods, which actually disrupted lignite extraction in the region. And finally, now today, a couple of months ago, we have the energy transition tracker from the Energy Community Secretariat to inform what is to be done in numbers. So I have tried to see what was this evolution, what actually happened on ground, and the World Bank database provides a good indication here. We are during these 14 years, we see certain evolution in the rule of law. Absolutely not enough. And an inadequate rule of law is still a barrier for investments. Of course, as we all know, the legal profession have to serve the public interest while investments are serving the customer. So we are not helping investments to serve the customer, which is important public interest by itself. Of course, we have this uncertainty about security of contract. We have a problem with the property rights. We have dysfunctional finance, and there is an accumulation of opportunity costs. And finally, there is uncertainty of demand. Contrary to that, there is a somewhat better evolution on the regulatory field and the government effectiveness field, at least in a way how the World Bank is measuring this. So we see that there is a bit of improvement. We see that there is a bit of degradation in some countries which are actually members of European Union. So it's not necessary that the membership itself guarantee actually improvement in an investment landscape. So here is what actually happened. And then we see that investments are actually happening. This is a snapshot from International Monetary Fund. They've been looking to the region, and they find that investments are well over European Union average in the context of a given GDP. They also find that majority of these investments are actually roads. Surprisingly so, there is a lot of transport infrastructure, inland waterways, railways, roads, pipelines, etc., which is heavily underutilized. However, for some reason, governments decided to invest over there. On the other side, as we may agree, there is a pressing need to do something about power generation capacity, which is heavily utilized. So, where we stand with this? We also see that governments are quite active on the financial markets, apparently displacing eventual private placements. Coronavirus made an impact, interesting impact. In a recent survey by ENTSO-E, the operators say that there is a minor positive impact of coronavirus on adequacy, meaning there was decrease of demand. I don't see that as a positive impact. If we are commercial industry, we would like to have demand. We would like customers to use our product, and we would like customers to pay for them. If customers are unable because of, for example, coronavirus, that's not good for the industry. So where we stand with this, there is a further uncertainty about demand. Looking to Europe before coronavirus, the ENTSO-E came with this understanding, which is over here. So it came to understanding that in 2030, this region is going to be fairly secure, fairly well supplied with the power generation capacity. However, that is going to happen without investments. For example, Serbia here is going and wishes to invest very little into new capacity. How that is possible? Only if the current production is actually preserved. At the beginning of this presentation, there was a little option that we don't want this existing portfolio to be preserved. So we have here signal that it is indeed going to be in place in 2030. Is that in line with the risks of climate change? Is that in line with the risks of emissions, etc.? Very difficult to say. So signals which are going to the eventual investors are quite confusing, and it's quite unlikely that these signals may prompt some investments. There is uncertainty, but no commercial investments. And that's how much I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alexander. So just one short question for you. So we all know that developing of the large-scale project may not be possible without some kind of government involvement or intervention. And what is the most important action at the moment that government can take, particularly to preserve the security of supply, for example?
I very much doubt that it's possible to have overnight sudden improvement in the rule of law and the quality of governance. So we probably need some innovative arrangement, some framework which will somehow actually promote investments within a given situation. There are few options for that. So build, operate, transfer, concessions, different options. And this is up for the legal profession to actually try to define these options, try to go one step closer to eventual investors and give them a different frameworks, different options to do so.
Okay, thank you very much once again, Alexander. Nice. I'm very pleased that you were with us and that we discussed such important topics, and looking forward to hear you again soon. And I will throw it up for the question if someone wants to ask you something. We'll do it later. Okay. Now I would like to move to our final closing speech, and just to note that the last year we had a speech from Professor Heffron, and he delivered a speech related to the energy law principles. I wanted to say that these principles now are translated and that will be uploaded to our web page today, later today, or maybe tomorrow. And I now wanted to invite Mr. Heffron to our panel. Mr. Heffron, are you here with us?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and hopefully next year I will be able to see you in person at this event. So I've been asked to provide some perspective on the energy law principles. and look at the impact in terms of COVID-19. And I will go straight into that. So I am a barrister at law, so qualified to practice, as well as a professor in global energy law and sustainability, and also a European Union Jean Monnet professor in the just transition to a low carbon economy. And you know, a few speakers today have already mentioned the issue of a just transition. So, you know, just for those who let's say may not know of the centre, we are over here at the top of Scotland, based here. And why I say it is because this is where the oil and gas, you know, the UK oil and gas is all offshore, just off the shore of Dundee. And this is why we were created 43 years ago, to provide some of that law and policy expertise. And it's also, let's say, reflecting the challenge we face today. You know, right here in this part of the UK, you know, we have a big challenge in terms of moving away from oil and gas to try and be a low carbon economy. So I think we can sympathize with some of the issues faced, you know, within Serbia in terms of this energy transition. And that's just a picture of the building. You know, when you're thinking maybe of where to go on your holidays once everything settles down, you can come over to Dundee and visit us here. You know, the world's oldest energy law institution. So, in terms of, you know, let's say the energy transition, I would also like to point out that in some ways, energy law is a subject area that is in transition, and it's something that we do need guidance on it. I mean, the figures have already been mentioned to a degree, you know, with around 44 trillion of new energy investment. We need a principle-based approach to manage that investment. But when we look around at why energy law is changing, we can see this direct impact across borders. So we can think of the Australian legal decision around rejecting a coal mine. And I just provide the reference there that people can go and look at it in more detail. But this was against coal. And the idea here, it was that the judge said, we don't want to be responsible for this coal being burnt in other parts of the world. So people are thinking about the broader impact of their own energy sector on different parts of the world. And this also was similar in a case in Kenya. So this isn't just happening in the developed world countries such as Australia. This is also happening in terms of in developing countries, you know, against coal, and, you know, making that decision that it is no longer economically viable. And we think of, you know, there are many legal issues here, you know, in terms of the rejection of coal, which I will touch on in more detail. So, you know, we can think of, you know, why energy law is becoming very important. There are a couple of aspects. You know, that figure has gone up. It's 44 trillion by 2040. Energy law has to govern that expenditure. And we also have a challenge, particularly here in the EU, and, you know, I believe in Serbia as well, that a lot of our energy infrastructure is old. It needs to be replaced. So it's not just about building new energy projects to meet demand. It's also about replacing all the old energy infrastructure. And that's a big challenge right here in the UK, which is why the UK, let's say, is building nuclear energy as well as a lot of wind. So, you know, just as a reminder, and it's good to see that the translation will be up later today. This same article is also translated into Chinese and several other languages. And it was good to write this with, you know, academics and people who are also qualified to practice from different places all over the world. But just as a reminder, we think of these principles, which, you know, is the essence, let's say, of the talk that I'm giving. So, you know, the principle of natural resource sovereignty, access, energy justice, sustainable use of natural resources, environment, human health and climate change, energy security, and resilience. We think of resilience today when we think of COVID-19 and that challenge that we, in terms of our economies, how can we ensure that our economies are more resilient when we have these big shocks? But we can think of a number of the other principles of why they're important. Access is always important, and at what level is access? When do we subsidize, give an energy subsidy, let's say, to lower income households? But we also think of sustainable use of our resources. We think of all the rare minerals that we use, let's say, in our computers today, our phones, and we also think of environment, human health and climate change. We see more and more studies around the impact of climate change. There is one study I saw recently that says those who live in London City, because of the air pollution, the children who grow up in London, their brains won't develop in the same way, because when you grow up in these big polluted cities, the impact of all the the CO2, the other greenhouse gases that are produced and that are in these cities, your brain will not develop in the same way as it would, let's say, if you weren't living in such a big polluted city. So we have more and more data, and one of the issues, particularly in those two judgments I said in Kenya and in Australia, is when we are building new energy infrastructure, we are able to properly cost and assess the impact of the project in the short, medium, and long term in terms of its environmental, human health and climate change impact. So as policymakers, let's say the policymakers have more data and can assess, is this project really going to deliver on what it says it's going to do? What are the impacts over time? And we are seeing big changes in terms of that particular principle. And that is affecting, as I will briefly highlight later, that is affecting the risk profile of an energy project. And remember, to me, maybe some people can dispute it, but let's say one of the big values of an energy lawyer for an energy company or for a government or for the public is, the idea of the energy lawyer is we are the ones who contract that risk away. We try and allocate that risk across all different stakeholders to ensure that there is limited risk from the project to the public. So, when we are dealing with these issues, the more data we have, the more we can, account for that risk. And what we see is that some of these projects are becoming very, very risky indeed. So they are the principles. We can also think of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It's great news to see recently that Donald Trump lost the election, and that we have Joe Biden, who is going to bring the US, one of the biggest polluters, not the biggest, not one of the biggest, the US is the biggest polluter per capita in the world. So we very much need them in the Paris Agreement to ensure that they make their contribution in terms of this energy transition. We can also see a big example recently that was announced. This is the images from the city of Jakarta in Indonesia. And this is why policymakers are considering this issue as very important. Jakarta is a city of 28 million people, and it was announced that it is going to be underwater by 2050. So imagine the big move here of operation, that they have to move this whole city. They've already announced where the new capital of Jakarta is going to be. I think they have already started construction, but imagine moving 28 million, the cost of all of that. And this is why policymakers are considering these issues, as particularly on this cost issue is more prevalent. But when we think about something like COVID-19, we have to sympathize with the annual climate change negotiations. And what I would say to you is, in terms of the principle around climate change and also the principle of energy justice, what we need to think about is the question the person asks in this comic, in this picture: what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? That is what I would say to people who don't believe in climate change is, in essence, what we are trying to achieve here in terms of these energy law principles is creating a better world. What we want are some of these issues on the board behind the speaker there. We want energy independence. We want to preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs. There are more green jobs being created than those in the fossil fuel sector. In the US, 10 to 1 green, for every 1 fossil fuel job, there are 10 jobs in the green economy. Livable cities, renewables, clean water, clean air, healthy children. You know, these are objectives that we are all working for, and there is nothing wrong, let's say, in trying to achieve these objectives. I just put up this infographic. I'll be happy to share it with your association if you want to put it up online on your association webpage. It's something I made just looking at the just transition to a low carbon economy. So it gives a range of the different perspectives. So I'll happily share it afterwards, and you can put it up on your own website for people to interact with, whether they be the public policymakers, etc. So we can think of, you know, directly how is COVID-19 testing energy law, and really, you know, COVID-19 shows that we really need to accelerate this energy transition. And we can see the push for a just transition to a low carbon economy, this idea of leaving no one behind. We live in a very unequal world. The most famous delivery driver is the richest man on earth in Amazon. His wealth has increased significantly during COVID-19. And we can think of the, you know, the global inequality that exists. And when we talk about a just transition to a low carbon economy, what we are trying to ensure is that no one is left behind. There is a lot of technology out there that current rules are preventing us, let's say, from using. And what we need in law and policy is not just an evolution. What COVID-19 shows is we need a revolution. Look at how fast the vaccines can be produced if human society puts their mind to it. We can surely do the same for the energy sector, which actually causes more deaths globally per year. CO2 causes more deaths than COVID-19 has. And what we need to think about, COVID-19 has really, I think, reflected, the last speaker had the image in the background. I would put up this image, and I've put up the statement of the parents saying to their child, is this the world that we're leaving for our children? And that's what we have to ask, is what world are we going to leave for our children and, you know, future generations to grow up? And I think COVID-19 has made us reflect as we have been sitting around in our own rooms, or maybe occasionally we've been allowed to go to the office. You know, we do need to think, is this what we want to bring? Why can't we have a better world? And this is something that we have thought about. So in terms of utilizing the technology, you know, we have to remember in terms of COVID-19, how fast we get that vaccine, you know, how fast can we accelerate this technological development? Renewable energy is already becoming cheaper. You can look, solar and wind are going down in cost significantly. And it's about creating the opportunity for utilizing that technology in our electricity grids. There are many countries in the EU which are preventing the fast use of renewable energy, and, you know, using various schemes like artificial intelligence in association with renewable energy, where the artificial intelligence technology learns our behavior and enables us to use renewable energy even more efficiently. But what we want to be doing as lawyers is, you know, challenging the full cost of either coal or gas, and realizing the opportunity more in renewable energy, the jobs, as I said, but also the impact on our environment in terms of water, air pollution, the subsidies and issues around access to the electricity grid. And I think we can see these issues more and more if we are looking for them, and the data is out there. And increasingly, we can get access to that data and realize what actually is the impact on our environments, on our economy, from the different types of energy infrastructure that we build. So, you know, when we talk of a low carbon economy, the idea, as I said, is about ensuring that no one is left behind. And you can think energy, as Ivana from Portugal said earlier, energy is the prime driver in society, and we can see this all across society in terms of the extractive industries, the batteries we use in our phone, in our cars, in our tablets, but also even spreading into the importance of energy into the fashion industry, food, etc. When we talk about a low carbon economy, it is about how energy not just affects energy within itself, but how it affects the rest of the economy as well. And I think as energy lawyers, we can even broaden out our perspective, that it doesn't just have to focus on energy law and energy infrastructure itself, but how the whole of the energy sector affects the rest of the economy. So, in terms of learning from other countries, what the COVID-19 and the principles, what we do need, is, I suppose a message similar to some of the other speakers. We do need that legal certainty that the energy law principles can provide. As I said, if you want investment, you need to investment enabling, the government or the public or the investor to lower the risk. And if we have a principle-based approach, we will show how we are going to lower that risk. And we want to be able to provide that certainty to the investor by lowering the risk based on a principle-based approach. And therefore, there will be opportunities to attract national and international investors. And I just put one example here in terms of if you're looking for a country that has fast accelerated its renewable energy, you can look at Vietnam and how they created energy auctions, and they have been very, very successful. And it's a way that you can show the fast acceleration of renewable energy if there is the right principle-based approach to backing that new, let's say, that new type of incentivization for new investment. So on that note, I will finish. So thank you very much for listening, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rafael. You mentioned the London in very disturbing manner, as you probably know, in terms of pollution. The Belgrade is the worst. So regards from Belgrade. Okay, I have just one. Since we are running out of time, I have just one quick question for you. So, from your point of view, which principle of energy law is of high importance and why?
I think today, I mean, they are all important, but I think today, as let's say, as lawyers, I think we have to reflect on the first principle, the principle of natural resource sovereignty. And I think the reason why is I don't think necessarily that we should allow our governments to say, it's up to us to decide what energy resources we want. I think we have to think about this from a global community perspective. And, we need to see direct action, that if we are to achieve global energy and climate targets by 2030, 2040, 2050, we need to decide, well, what energy infrastructure do we want? And we need to see more commitment by the big countries to say, here, we are going to give you the technology essentially for free or at a very low cost. We see this in terms of COVID-19. One of the drugs is going to be supplied by AstraZeneca at $350, nearly at cost price. We need to see the same happen in the energy sector. And, for example, we need the US, China, the UK, France. They need to start supplying this technology at low cost and saying, here you go, here it is, let's end the pollution, let's end the impact of pollution, and here it is. And so that's why I think that principle is the most important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rafael. Always pleasure to have you on the panel. Now I have just one pleading for the audience. Please put your questions in our chat box, and we will endeavor to answer afterwards. But now I would like to invite Alexandra to share with us what we learned from today's session. So Alexandra, please take the floor.
Thank you, Vuk. Also, thank you to all of our esteemed colleagues and speakers for today's presentations. They were truly excellent. We did learn a lot, and both the focus was, yeah, exactly on how we can achieve the decarbonization of the economy, but also what were the impacts of COVID-19 to our field, to the fields of energy and to the fields of climate changes and the climate law. As I said, we did learn a lot, and there are a lot of lessons that we can take away from today's sessions. So I will just briefly try to recap some of the most important ones. Starting from the introductory presentation of Mr. Egenhofer, we have learned why the European Green Deal is such a powerful tool and probably one of the most powerful set of policy initiatives in the field of climate law. But also what was the most important for me, and probably the crucial part of Mr. Egenhofer's delivery today, is how this deal affects the Western Balkan. We did see more than one reason of why this deal benefits both the economy and the Western Balkan in general, across all industries and across all sectors. Further, Ms. Rosetta Karova has shared with us her views on how we can possibly achieve the greening of the energy community. We were introduced to the Green Agenda for Western Balkans and learned why this declaration is such a milestone in achieving the resource efficient and competitive economy. We also learned what are the greatest challenges in achieving the use of the clean hydrogen as an alternative energy source. And finally, we did get some sneak peeks on the upcoming activities and the commitments of the energy community in facilitating the energy transition of its contracting parties. Further, a very specific lesson which we have learned from the presentation of Ms. Yvonne Roja, another lady from our panel, was that the green energy is basically the main driver towards decarbonization of the economy. As Ms. Roja correctly stated, I must agree with that, the tool to achieve this and the main prerequisite in achieving this goal is to have the adequate institutional support, but also the support of the national associations and energy law associations such as the EFELA or the Serbian Energy Law Association. We tend to do this, and Branislava and the rest of the team, we will try to provide our support in such an important goal for the economy. Finally, in my opinion, the presentations of Mr. Kovacevic and Professor Heffron concerning the impacts of COVID-19 to the energy law and the sectoral investments do share the same lesson, briefly. But this lesson is that not only that COVID-19 did not overshadow the energy and climate initiatives, but to the very contrary, it has just accelerated the energy transition, and it has reconfirmed the importance of investing in the sustainable energy. We can only hope that this lesson is also going to be learned by the stakeholders and all the relevant industry players. Lastly, I believe the lessons we have learned today are greatly similar to the lessons which we learned from facing COVID-19. Whether it is an issue of a public concern, whatever it is, whether it is a pandemic or it is the climate change, such issue does not know of the borders of one state, and such issue will not adapt to different policies. It will not adapt to different political ideologies, and certainly it cannot be successfully fought against unless this fight becomes a common goal of the entire society. Saying that, I will just conclude that, in my opinion, the key message that our speakers wanted to convey to us today is that the green energy is to the climate change what devoted medical workers are to this pandemic, the backbone. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Now I would like to invite, first, thank you all for today's discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience as well to join us. And now I would like to invite our president, Branislava, to close today's session. Regards to all. Bye.
Dragi dame i gospodo, kolege, prijatelji, učesnici ove naše konferencije, posle 2 dana i 2 veoma zanimljive sekcije, evo, pre nego što naš tehnički organizator kaže da i prekine ovu našu, makar i virtuelnu socijalno druženje i razmenu mišljenja na temu prava energetike i ove naše konferencije pod nazivom Pravo energetike, životna sredina, investicije u kontekstu i nakon koronavirusa, želim da se zahvalim i ovim putem još jednom našim sponzorima, Heinrich Stiftung u Beogradu, advokatskim kancelarijama BDK Advokati, Moravčević, Vojnović i partneri u saradnji sa Šonker, Rokas kancelariji Karanović, partners kancelariji CMS-u. Želim da se zahvalim svim našim govornicima koji su nam iz različitih delova sveta pomogli da rasvetlimo našu današnju temu, da se zahvalim našim divnim moderatorima i našim dragim kolegama koji su nam kroz naučne lekcije omogućili da bolje sumiramo zaključke ove naše konferencije. I još jednom, svima vama koji ste pratili ovu našu konferenciju, da se zahvalim što smo evo u ova 2 dana i u ova 4 i nešto sata bili zajedno, bez obzira na uslove u kojima se nalazimo, i uspeli da razgovaramo o pravu energetike, da razmenimo naše misli, da govorimo o globalnim principima prava energetike i da vam istom prilikom poželim da budete i ostanete zdravi, da se vidimo sledeći put. I ne želim da kažem nadam se, nego verujem da se vidimo svi zajedno ovde u Beogradu i da zaista lično budemo povezani i razmenimo ove naše teme. Zahvaljujem još jednom i do sledećeg viđenja. Doviđenja.